Good afternoon, prayer group. I hope you're doing well and that you've been really growing and learning and just experiencing God's greater presence and intimacy as you have been praying more. I know it's been difficult to pray as a church, but I hope that God has provided really awesome opportunities to do that in very different ways that are a little bit non-conventional. And that those experiences maybe are opportunities to open doors in the future when things return to normal, that maybe normal looks a little bit different for us as Anchor Church and you as you follow Christ in prayer. So with that being said, it was a pleasure to meet with many of you this evening. On Zoom. I know that some of us had to miss that, and that's okay. I know a lot of us are Zoomed out or technologied out in with all that is going on, but I do pray that you're able to engage in these studies. My hope is that today and this study will also be a little bit different, a little bit shorter, but I do want to share a couple of thoughts as you delve into this reflective piece that we're really going to hone in on two things. Number one, that we are growing individually as prayer warriors, because that kind of forms the foundation for us to grow as a church in prayer, but also that Anchor Church sees its role as a priesthood of believers, and that we actually have a priestly role in prayer that has been given to us when we were saved. And so that is my hope as we really delve into chapters 6 and 7. Chapter 6 is, if you'll notice, very pointed at the leaders of the church. And I think we should each read this, not being critical of the leaders, but as you're going to see in the study that we are each leaders because we have been given that role as intercessors within the church. And so with that being said, I want to walk us through a few things in the study guide and share with you a few thoughts as we begin. Now, if you'll notice in your book, in chapter 6, we're just going to kind of camp here for a moment, that the author says that the leaders of the church often go down through a whole litany of questions when they're being interviewed, and very few of them are faced with the question, tell me your prayer life. This is an enormously important question, but I think as we grow as a church, that this is actually an important question for us to be asked. Tell me your story. Tell me about your prayer life. This is very different than tell me your testimony and tell me your story of how you became a Christian. That's pretty easy to share back to somebody else. But tell me about your prayer life delves a little bit deeper. And I think it touches at places of both success and possibly guilt or even shame in some of us that we know we should be better in prayer, but we may not necessarily be accessing that and be committed to that for various reasons, as we are going to see in chapter 7. And so for a moment, what I would like you to do is I would like you to look at question number 1 in your study guide. And I would like you, as if somebody had asked you, as if I had asked you, or somebody else from the prayer group, could you tell me about your prayer life? Without guilt or shame, write that down and really see what comes forth. And I believe that is incredibly revealing. As you have written down your story, I think fewer of us would see ourselves as leaders in prayer. In fact, most of the time we look to the leadership of the church, that they are the ones to be leading us in prayer, and we are not to be leading in prayer. However, what you'll notice in the previous chapter about the church is that leadership was incredibly decentralized. They didn't have necessarily a lot of leadership. The church itself was actually doing the leading, especially in Acts. And if you would look, if you were to create a triangle, whereas our head, we often see our head as the pastor of the church, and we look to the head as the one to lead us in the things that we should be doing. Their head, the triangle was almost flipped upside down in some senses, because there was no head. The church body was working together. They were praying together. They were acting together. They were eating and fellowshipping together. And they knew that their head was Jesus Christ. And so they were following that, and they were praying fervently. It was a really incredible powerful time in which they saw God act, because they were not waiting upon anybody else to lead them in that way. In the same way, First Peter reveals this really awesome role that we have been bought into and grafted into as new believers. And so if you look at question number 2 in 1 Peter 2:9, it's going to ask you to read about who we are now. We're not just bought and saved, but we are now what is considered a royal priesthood. If we go back to the very beginning of our lesson, it's really awesome, because this is this on-the-job training for heaven when we are reigning with Jesus Christ. Right now, we are considered royalty, a royal priesthood that has been bought at a price. And so with that being said, there is an article that is provided called A Kingdom of Priests. And I would like you to read through that. I've actually provided a short section for you to read, but it has enormous implications that as a royal priesthood, we have 2 roles. I'll let you read about them, but one of them is that we are powerful intercessors and that we are praying. This implies that this is not just a one-off meeting. We're getting together to meet for a Bible study, or we're getting together to worship on Sunday, but that this is our role. This is who we are as a people group, okay? Not just individually, but as Anchor Church as a whole. And so what I want you to do right now is to take a moment to pause this, read this article, and then I want you to put yourself in that priestly role that you have. This has been a promise given to you and a role given to you. Whether or not you're fulfilling that role right now, you'll be able to see. And then I want us to look at Anchor Church and our togetherness. And are we fulfilling that role as a priesthood of believers, not as a priestly believer, but as a priesthood of believers, that we will see God's glory really manifested in our church and in our community, because we are fulfilling that role.